My name is Everett. For 14 years I thought I understood what love was. I thought I understood Lenore, the woman I had promised to share my life with. She wasn't just my wife. She was my world, the one person I trusted without question. But trust, as I would learn, can shatter in an instant. That night started like any other. Lenore had been talking about the gala for weeks, a high-profile event she had helped organize. It was supposed to be a celebration of her hard work, a chance for her to shine. She spent hours getting ready, and when she stepped out of our bedroom in that flowing red dress, she looked breathtaking. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning slightly, her blonde hair catching the light. "Stunning," I replied honestly, though something in her eyes seemed distant. The gala was held in an opulent ballroom, the kind that seemed plucked straight out of a movie. Lenore was in her element, weaving through the crowd with ease, her laughter ringing out as she greeted guests. I stayed by her side at first, proud of how effortlessly she commanded attention. But as the evening went on, I started to feel like an accessory, an afterthought. She drifted farther from me, engrossed in conversations with people I didn't know. I told myself it was her job to network, to make an impression. I didn't want to seem needy or insecure, so I hung back, sipping my drink and watching from the sidelines. That's when I noticed him. A man I'd never seen before, tall and self-assured, with an easy smile that seemed to draw people in. Lenore's face lit up when he approached her, a brightness I hadn't seen in years. They started talking, and within minutes, it was as if the rest of the room had disappeared for them. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just friendly conversation, that she was making connections for work. But then I saw her laugh, her hand lightly brushing his arm, and the knot in my stomach tightened. The moment that broke me came later in the evening. The orchestra began playing a slow, romantic tune, and couples moved to the dance floor. I thought this might finally be my chance to share a moment with Lenore, to reconnect. But before I could make my way to her, I saw him take her hand. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even look for me. She followed him onto the dance floor, her face glowing with excitement. They danced as if no one else existed. Her arms rested on his shoulders, his hands on her waist, their movements perfectly in sync. It wasn't just a dance, it was intimate, electric. It was the kind of connection I hadn't felt with her in years, and it was devastating to watch. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or even breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in, the noise of the room fading until all I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding. As the song ended and they left the dance floor together, laughing like old friends, something inside me broke. I realized in that moment that I didn't recognize the woman I had married. The warmth and love I had always felt from her were gone, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. I stayed at the edge of the room for the rest of the night, watching as she floated through the crowd, her attention fixed on him. I don't think she even noticed when I left. When I got home, I sat in the dark for hours, replaying the night in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. But no matter how hard I tried, one thought kept haunting me. I had become invisible to the woman I loved, and that was only the beginning. That night, sitting alone in the dark of our living room, I felt a storm of emotions I couldn't quite name. Anger, sadness, confusion. I stared at the clock as the hours passed, waiting for the sound of the door, for Lenore to return. Maybe she'd have an explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe I was blowing this out of proportion. But she didn't come home, not for hours. When the front door finally opened, the faint sound of her heels clicking against the floor sent a wave of cold through me. I stayed in the shadows, watching her from the corner of the room. She didn't notice me. She was humming softly to herself, smiling in a way that cut me to my core. "Hey!" I finally said, my voice low but steady. She jumped, startled, clutching her bag. "Oh my God, Everett! You scared me?" she said, letting out a nervous laugh. "What are you doing up?" "I couldn't sleep," I replied, standing and walking into the light. "I was waiting for you." Her smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "You didn't have to wait up. The gala ran late, and I stayed to help clean up a bit. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold onto the version of her I thought I knew. But the image of her on the dance floor with that man, Caleb, was burned into my memory. "Did you have fun tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. She hesitated just for a moment. "Yeah, it was great. Everyone seemed to enjoy themselves." "Everyone, huh?" I pressed. She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. "I saw you dancing with him," I said quietly. For the first time, her confidence wavered. "Oh, that? Everett, it was just a dance. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "You danced with him like I wasn't even in the room, Lenore. You didn't even look at me all night." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Everett, I don't know what you want me to say. It was a work event. I had to network. I'm sorry if you felt ignored, but you know how important this is for my career." "Networking," I scoffed. "That's what you call it? Wrapping your arms around another man in the middle of the room? Laughing with him like he's the only one who matters?" Her eyes hardened. "You're overreacting," she said firmly. "It was just a dance. You're being ridiculous." I stared at her, searching her face for some hint of the woman I thought I married. But all I saw was a stranger. Someone who didn't seem to care about the pain she was causing me. "I don't feel ridiculous," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I feel invisible, Lenore. Like I don't even exist to you anymore." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "Everett, that's not fair," she said, stepping closer. "I'm under a lot of pressure. I didn't mean to make you feel that way." But her words felt hollow, like an apology offered out of obligation rather than sincerity. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to her. "I think I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight," I said finally. She blinked, surprised. "Everett, come on." But I was already walking away, leaving her standing alone in the living room. As I lay in the cold, unfamiliar bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly seeing her. Not the version of her I had built up in my mind, but the real Lenore. And I wasn't sure I liked what I saw. The next morning, the tension in the house was so thick it was almost suffocating. Lenore tried to act like everything was normal, humming to herself as she brewed coffee, scrolling through her phone, and avoiding my gaze. I sat at the table, staring into my mug, trying to piece together how we had ended up here. "Do you want eggs?" she asked, her tone light and casual, as if nothing had happened the night before. "No," I replied, my voice flat. I couldn't bring myself to pretend. Not when the image of her and Caleb on the dance floor was still fresh in my mind. She sighed, clearly frustrated. "Everett, are we really going to do this? Sulk around all day because of one stupid dance?" I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. "It wasn't just a dance, Lenore. It was the way you looked at him. The way you ignored me the entire night. Do you have any idea how humiliating that felt?" Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked genuinely guilty. But then her defenses kicked in. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Caleb is just a donor. He's important to the company, and I was being polite." "Polite?" I scoffed, pushing back my chair and standing up. "Polite doesn't look like the two of you sharing a private world in the middle of a crowded ballroom." She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "So what, Everett? What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But I didn't do anything wrong." Her words hit me like a slap. The lack of accountability, the dismissiveness, it was all too much. I grabbed my coat and keys, the need to escape overwhelming me. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "For a drive," I muttered, slamming the door behind me. The cold air outside was a shock to my system, but it cleared my head just enough to think. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel as I replayed every moment from the night before. Was I overreacting? Was I really just being paranoid? But deep down, I knew the truth. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about one night or one dance. This was about the growing distance between us, the way she had been pulling away for months, maybe even years. And now I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I finally returned home hours later, the house was quiet. Lenore was in the living room, typing furiously on her laptop. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Have a nice drive?" she asked, her tone clipped. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the bedroom and sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I needed answers, but I didn't even know where to start. That night, as she slept beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lying next to a stranger. I thought about confronting her again, demanding the truth, but something held me back. Fear, maybe, or the faint hope that I was wrong. But the cracks in our marriage were no longer something I could ignore, and I knew deep down that they were only going to get bigger. The days that followed felt like a waking nightmare. Lenore and I fell into a cold, uneasy rhythm. She would wake up early, leave for work, and come home late. I tried to busy myself with errands, work, and anything that would keep me distracted, but it was impossible to ignore the growing chasm between us. I wanted to believe her, to believe that the night at the gala was nothing more than a misunderstanding, a misstep. But my instincts wouldn't let me rest. Something about her behavior felt off. The way she always had her phone glued to her hand, her sudden need to stay late at work more often, and the way she avoided my questions about her day. It all felt wrong. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until she was in the shower and slipped into the living room, where she had left her phone charging. My hands trembled as I picked it up, guilt and fear gnawing at me. I didn't want to be this person, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know the truth. Unlocking her phone wasn't difficult. I knew her passcode. My stomach churned as I opened her messages. Most of them seemed innocent at first, mundane conversations with colleagues and friends. But then I saw his name, Caleb. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked on the thread. The messages were casual, at least on the surface, but there was a familiarity to them that made my skin crawl. Caleb, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. Lenore, you're too sweet. I'm still smiling. Still smiling. My hands tightened around the phone as I scrolled further. The messages weren't explicit, but the undertones were undeniable. Inside jokes, late-night exchanges, and a level of intimacy that shouldn't exist between a married woman and a professional acquaintance. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My worst fears were being confirmed with every word I read. And then, as if to twist the knife even deeper, I found a picture. It wasn't scandalous, just a selfie of the two of them taken at the gala. But the way she leaned into him, the way they smiled like they shared a secret no one else knew, told me everything I needed to know. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and sat down, my head in my hands. The evidence was there, undeniable, yet I still found myself questioning it. Was I overreacting? Was this all innocent and just being misinterpreted through my paranoia? But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. Lenore was hiding something, and I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. That night, as she climbed into bed beside me, I lay stiff as a board, my mind racing. She tried to pull me into her arms, but I couldn't do it. I turned away, pretending to be asleep. She sighed softly, but she didn't press the issue. It was as if she didn't care, or worse, as if she was relieved. The following morning, I made a decision. I couldn't sit idly by while my marriage unraveled. If Lenore wouldn't give me the answers I needed, I would find them myself. The morning after I found the messages, I felt like a shell of myself. The doubt and betrayal clawed at me like a parasite, feeding off every unanswered question in my mind. Lenore was already out of bed, her usual routine unchanged, while I sat staring at the ceiling, wondering how she could act so normal when my world was crumbling. When I finally made my way downstairs, I found her sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She glanced up at me with a faint smile. "Good morning," she said casually, as if she hadn't just spent the night exchanging intimate texts with another man. "Morning?" I mumbled, grabbing a mug and pouring myself some coffee. My voice felt strained, like I was trying to force normalcy into a situation that was anything but. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She was out the door within 20 minutes. Her cheerful goodbye echoing through the house as I stood frozen in the kitchen. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and followed. I'd never done anything like this before. The thought of tailing my own wife felt absurd, humiliating even, but I couldn't shake the need to know the truth. If she wasn't going to give it to me, I'd find it myself. Keeping a safe distance, I followed her car down the familiar streets that led to her office. She parked in her usual spot, got out, and walked into the building. For a moment I felt foolish. Maybe she really was just going to work. Maybe I'd let my suspicions get the better of me. But then, a few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the GPS tracker I'd installed in her car earlier that morning. Felt wrong, invasive, but I was desperate. The alert showed her car was moving, not heading home or to any of the usual places she frequented, but to a quiet part of town I didn't recognize. I jumped in my car and drove as quickly as I could without raising suspicion. When I arrived, I spotted her car parked in front of a small cafe. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, searching for her. And then I saw them, Lenore and Caleb, sitting at a table near the window, leaning in close like they were the only two people in the world. From where I sat in my car, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language said it all. She was laughing, her hand brushing his arm, and he was smiling at her in a way that made my stomach turn. They weren't colleagues. They weren't just friends. This was something else entirely. For nearly an hour, I watched as they talked, laughed, and shared what looked like an effortless intimacy. When they finally stood to leave, my instincts screamed at me to confront them, to storm in and demand answers. But I couldn't. Instead, I followed them again, keeping a safe distance as they walked to Caleb's car. They didn't drive far, just a few blocks to what appeared to be a boutique hotel. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They walked inside together, and I sat there, paralyzed, as the minutes stretched into hours. When Lenore finally emerged, she was alone, her expression calm, even cheerful. She got into her car and drove away as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just spent the afternoon in a hotel with another man. I sat there for a long time after she left, trying to process what I just witnessed. I felt a mix of rage, humiliation, and heartbreak so intense I thought it might swallow me whole. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything that would release the pressure building inside me. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the hotel entrance, wondering how the woman I loved could betray me so effortlessly. By the time I got home, Lenore was already there, cooking dinner and humming to herself like everything was fine. When she saw me walk in, she smiled. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her tone light and cheerful. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even look at her. I mumbled something about being tired and went straight to the guest room, locking the door behind me. As I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, I knew I had reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I couldn't keep living in this limbo of suspicion and doubt. If Lenore thought she could lie to me and get away with it, she was wrong. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to sit quietly and let her destroy everything we had built. The storm was coming, and she had no idea. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Sitting in that guest room, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to live like this anymore. Lenore had crossed a line, and no amount of excuses or half-hearted apologies would erase what I'd seen. It was time to confront her, to stop pretending this was all in my head. I found her in the kitchen, once again acting as though everything was perfectly normal. She stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, humming to herself like she didn't have a care in the world. The sight of her, so calm, so unbothered, made my stomach churn. "Morning," she said cheerfully, glancing over her shoulder as I entered the room. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the table and sat down, folding my arms as I stared at her. My silence must have caught her attention because she turned to look at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. or at least the appearance of it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" I asked bluntly. She froze for a fraction of a second, so brief I almost missed it, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. "What do you mean?" she asked, turning back to the stove. "I was at work." "No, you weren't," I said firmly. "I followed you, Lenore. I saw you with him." Her hand faltered, and the spatula clattered onto the counter. She turned around slowly, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice shaky now. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "I saw you with Caleb at the cafe. I saw you go to the hotel with him. Do you really think I'm that stupid?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. Then, to my shock, she laughed. A cold, humorless sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You followed me?" she said, her tone incredulous. "Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" "Don't turn this around on me," I shot back. "You're the one sneaking around with another man, not me." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You've got it all wrong," she said defensively. "Caleb is just a friend. We were discussing work, nothing more." "In a hotel room?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you think I'm blind? Or just too weak to confront the truth?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it again. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as the fight drained out of her. "Fine," she said quietly. "You're right. I wasn't at work. I was with Caleb." The admission hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I had already known the truth. Hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. Nothing happened." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "You don't spend hours in a hotel room with someone you're just friends with." "How long, Lenore?" She hesitated, and then finally she answered. "A few months," she said, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "It started as harmless flirting. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I felt the air leave my lungs, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like 1,000 bricks. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this to me? To us?" She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe, or regret. "I don't know," she said helplessly. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Everett. I never wanted this to happen." "But it did," I said, my voice cold. "You made it happen." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. For the first time, she seemed to understand the gravity of what she had done. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and there was no going back. "I need some time to think," I said finally, standing up. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. I'll come back when I'm ready." "Everett, wait," she started, but I didn't let her finish. I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me, and got into my car. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How had we ended up here? Was there anything left to salvage? Or was this the end? The woman I had loved for 14 years had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if I even wanted to. I drove for hours, aimlessly weaving through the city streets, trying to outrun the whirlwind of emotions clawing at my chest. Rage, heartbreak, confusion. They all competed for dominance in my mind. I thought about all the times I had trusted Lenore, all the sacrifices I'd made for her, and how easily she had thrown it all away. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot overlooking the river. The stillness of the water was a sharp contrast to the chaos inside me. I sat there, staring at the rippling surface, and for the first time in years, I felt completely untethered. I tried to piece it all together, to find some explanation that would make sense of what she had done. Was it me? Had I missed something? Had I failed her in some way? But no matter how much I searched for answers, I kept circling back to one undeniable truth. She had made a choice. When the sky began to darken, I knew I couldn't stay in that parking lot forever. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't face her. Not yet. Instead of going home, I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a room with a bed and a bathroom, but it was enough. I needed space to think, to figure out what came next. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage in my mind. The good times, the bad times, the moments that now felt like warning signs I had ignored. Every memory was tainted. Every happy moment overshadowed by the knowledge of her betrayal. The next morning, I decided I couldn't do this alone. I needed to talk to someone, to unload the weight that was crushing me. I called my closest friend, Weston, someone I'd known since college. Weston had always been the steady one, the guy who could see through the noise and offer perspective. When I showed up at his house, he opened the door with a concerned look on his face. "Everett, what's going on? You sounded like hell on the phone." I stepped inside, the words tumbling out of me before I could stop them. I told him everything, the gala, the texts, the hotel. By the time I finished, I was shaking, my voice raw from holding back tears. Weston listened silently, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. When I was done, he let out a long sigh. "Man, I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "But one thing's for sure, you don't deserve this." Hearing those words from someone else felt like a lifeline. For so long, I had been questioning myself, wondering if I was the problem. But Weston's unwavering support gave me the clarity I needed. "What are you going to do?" he asked after a while. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to try to fix things, to see if there's anything left to salvage. But another part of me, I trailed off, my throat tightening. "I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again." Weston nodded. "Whatever you decide, just make sure it's what you want. Don't let her guilt trip you or manipulate you into staying if your heart isn't in it." His words stayed with me as I left his house later that day. I still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time I felt like I had a sense of direction. When I finally returned home that evening, Lenore was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up as I walked in, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Everett," she said softly, standing up, "can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a seat across from her, folding my hands and meeting her gaze. "Start from the beginning," I said. "I want to hear the truth. Everything." She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "Start with why," I said, my voice cold. "Why him? Why now? Why throw away everything we've built?" She took a deep breath, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I felt invisible, Everett, like I was just going through the motions every day, and no one noticed. Caleb made me feel alive again." Her words felt like a slap in the face. "Alive," I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean betraying your husband made you feel alive?" "No, that's not what I meant," she said quickly, wiping at her tears. "I know I've hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I need you to understand. I never stopped loving you. Do you even hear yourself?" I snapped. "You're trying to justify this, justify cheating on me, by saying you felt neglected? Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" "I'm not trying to justify it," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm trying to explain. I know I messed up, Everett. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Please don't give up on us." Her tears, her pleas, they didn't move me. I felt numb, like I was watching this conversation unfold from a distance. I wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry, but the damage was done. "I need time," I said finally, standing up. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lenore. I don't even know if I want to." She started to say something, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. "Just give me space." Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could try to piece together the shattered remains of our marriage, or I could walk away and start over. Either choice would leave scars, but one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The house felt suffocating, filled with memories that were now tainted by betrayal. Lenore and I barely spoke, existing like strangers under the same roof. She tried to reach out, leaving me notes, making my favorite meals, even crying in the doorway of the guest room late at night. But I was beyond words. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. One evening, I sat alone in the backyard, staring up at the sky as the sun dipped below the horizon. I thought about my life before Lenore, about the man I used to be before our marriage defined me. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten who that man was. I had spent so many years thinking of us that I had stopped thinking about me. And that's when I knew. I wasn't going to waste another second trying to fix something that was already broken. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of betrayal, constantly questioning my worth. I deserved better. I deserved peace. The next morning, I packed a bag. Lenore was in the kitchen when I walked in, her face pale when she saw me. "Everett," she whispered, her eyes darting to the suitcase in my hand. "Please, don't do this." I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "Lenore, this isn't about punishing you," I said, my voice calm. "This is about me choosing myself for once. I can't stay in a marriage where trust doesn't exist." Her lips trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'll do anything, Everett. Therapy, counseling. Please, just don't leave." I shook my head gently. "Some things can't be repaired, Lenore. And even if they could, I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'll ever be enough for you again." She sobbed then, but I didn't waver. For the first time, I wasn't second-guessing myself. I wasn't trapped in the cycle of doubt and pain. I was free. I turned and walked toward the door. When I stepped outside, the air felt fresher, lighter. I was leaving behind more than just a house. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had accepted less than he deserved. It wasn't easy. Divorce never is. But the months that followed brought clarity I hadn't felt in years. I focused on myself, my career, my health, my passions. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with. And slowly I began to heal. One afternoon, months after I had left, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop, flipping through a book. The bell above the door jingled, and when I glanced up, I saw her. She wasn't Lenore. She was something new, a fresh start, a chance at something real. She smiled as she passed my table, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than pain, hope. And I realized then, I had lost a marriage, but I had gained something much more valuable, myself.